Hello, welcome to my first live stream back after summer. I'm joined today by Michele Zaccagnini, who's going to talk to us about music and composition in academia. And I'll just let Michele introduce himself and give his credentials and whatnot.
Hi, thank you for hosting me. I, first of all, I should premise my whole spiel by saying that what I'm going to say it's about my experience. Of course, I don't claim to talk for the whole academic field of composition, but my background is I grew up in Italy and I studied music at the conservatory in Rome. I studied clarinet there, but I started composing in my early 20s. And I kind of got the conservatory background, like heavy theory of, European tradition. And then I kind of got the idea of composing for films more of from a practical perspective because you got to make a living, so I thought that could be a place to start. And I worked in movies for a while, mostly in the technical part. I was a music editor in Cinecittà, which is the studios in Rome. And then I moved to LA, where I studied. Actually, I really started writing quote unquote serious music in LA with this. I kind of had a serendipitous encounter with this former professor at Utah University. And I started studying privately with him, and eventually kind of suggested, why don't you do graduate studies in composition here in the US? And I didn't know anything about it. We don't have that kind of stuff in Europe, I don't think. So I said, I don't know, I was ready, in my 30s. I don't know if I want to start studying composition now, like the whole program. But then you mentioned that these programs are funded.
I'm sorry to interrupt you,
Sure.
because you initially you actually finished, and I think you got your master's in economics, right?
Yeah, I studied economics because again, practical reasons.
Mm.
I liked, actually started studying law because my family is a family of lawyers. So and then I hated law, and I did one exam in economics, which I liked because, as it so happened, I actually like math, and I didn't know that, and so I got a degree in economics just because you need a job. So,
Mm.
and being a musician is not really a great choice for a career, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
And so eventually, yeah, I when this professor, Bruce Reich was his name, told me about being funded to study composition at graduate level as a doctorate. I was like, just tell me where to sign. That's 4 or 5 years of just writing music for me was great, and I did that, and it was great on many respects. And I just pretty much developed a lot in terms of my own compositional voice, and I experimented. I started my program, and this was at Brandeis University in close to Boston. um, I started the program writing pretty much. I wasn't writing 12 tone, but I was writing definitely atonal stuff, and which, it's, as it turns out, it's pretty important. It's pretty popular in the academic world. By the end, I was writing very different music. I changed throughout, like gradually, and but I thought I'm convinced that my music at the end was more valid, had more value, just because it was really coming directly from my own, you know, understanding of music, and it was more grounded in a like an instinctive sort of uh, impulse rather than a more theoretical one.
I
And
think I should mention that you have your own YouTube channel, right? So if people want, they can take a look at your videos where you also post some of your like multimedia compositions, and you've
Yeah.
got a sort of, I'd say, like short video essays on differing topics that are actually quite interesting for people who are interested in sort of more. They call it zeitgenössische Musik in German, but I'm sure there's some better term now for contemporary music. Probably would
Uh,
be the English analog. Um,
yeah, it's
People
the
who are
name.
interested in that
The
can.
naming of it is a little problematic. I don't know what to call it either.
Yeah, I think, which is why I wanted to ask you, since you're also a professor of composition at the moment. I think,
Yeah.
uh, and I wanted to ask you, because we discussed beforehand, you actually discussed the difference between modern and postmodern, and I think a lot of people in our field as composers, and even people who are deep in academia, don't seem to know the difference, and people can get confused and misuse the terminology. And I think that would be kind of useful if you give us like a brief rundown what the difference is between those two and how that sort of applies to music.
Yeah. So I teach at the moment. I'm teaching two classes at the University of Virginia and in Charlottesville, and I teach a composition class and a computer music class, and sometimes I teach also a multimedia composition class. Yeah, towards the end of my, I mean, actually, this is started after I graduated uh, with my doctorate. I got really into algorithmic composition and using computers as a generative way of to compose. And it's not like it's not as um, it's not as strange as it sounds. It's really just a way of generating material that then you use to compose something else. But that maybe we'll talk about that later.
Yeah,
Um,
it's sort of like the dice rolling in the 18th
right,
century.
in
Yeah.
a way, but less. I don't use any randomness. For me, like
Okay.
the process is completely deterministic. There is no stochastic. So
Okay.
again, like that's a longer maybe discussion we can have, but it is related to the idea of modernism and postmodernism that I do kind of stress in my classes, because um, not for any theoretical academic reason, but because I think there are interesting categories to keep in mind when we parse through the repertoire from the late 19 to today, pretty much.
Okay.
And the so modernism is something that can be traced back to the beginning of the 20th century, and it comes from it springs out of this moment where at the end of the 19th century you have, for some reason which I don't think is just coincidental, you have so many inventions, uh, like warp speed acceleration of technology. You like recording, like audio recording was became a
Yeah.
thing,
Film.
photography,
Yeah.
film, all of
Yeah.
this happened, the
Telephone,
electricity,
everything, yeah.
telephone, everything
Electricity,
happened at
yeah.
that moment.
Yeah.
And this is like a culmination of something, and the industrial revolution is of course behind all of this. And so what happens is that the artists, which are usually, the ones that have the better sense, the historical sense of what's going on, are heavily influenced by this new, like a bunch of new things that are happening. And the reaction to that is, well, we are in a new era. We now, things are not what they used to be, and not only that, but we can pretty much disregard, either disregard or really not being too involved in the past tradition, in the canon. And you see this happening in across different art forms and across even different political understandings. So you have the futurists that are definitely a modernist movement. The futurists in Italy, they are pretty much, and there are futurists for, sculpture, music, visual arts.
What would be
Futurist,
like a futurist composer, if you have an?
uh, the Russolo was supposed to be the kind of like is the one who wrote the manifesto. It was called The Art of Noise.
Okay.
But there are others. Pratella, I think, is another one. They're not very well known, but they
Yeah,
did.
that's why I asked. Yeah,
Yeah,
never heard. I mean, I've
so,
heard of futurism, but I've never heard of a futurist composer, which is why.
yeah. The visual artists are more famous, like Boccioni,
Mhm.
Balla, and also poets. D'Annunzio is related to the futurists also.
Mhm.
Even though it was an older generation, it was kind of like the father figure of a lot of these people. And I'm not an expert, by the way. I might get some details wrong, so please
Fine. I'm sure
excuse for
people will correct us in the comments.
right.
Yeah.
So the future is said pretty much, for as far as music is concerned, uh, we went from very harmonic music to increasingly more noisy music, more dissonant, and eventually more like the sound of industrial sounds are the new music, sort of thing.
Okay.
And they invented these instruments, that they called it intona rumori, which means just tuning noises.
Okay.
And there were like machines that would just produce different noises. And so these are um definitely modernists. Also, they come up with a categorization of noises, and it's like, now we're going to use the hissing noises versus the rumbling noises. Like, they made a whole thing of
And what time period are we? Are we like
this is the
post?
very early 20th century. So we're
So
talking
20s?
1905. No, even
Oh, okay.
earlier. Yeah,
Okay.
very, very. I think
So
the art of
pre-World War
noise,
One.
pre-World War One. Yes, this is, you actually understand like World War One happens after this like big, outburst of enthusiasm, and there was something in the air. I don't know what it was, but something, a lot of excitement for sure. And so that's one thing that it's important in modernism, is not just we want to do something new, but we want to do something new and we want to create a new paradigm, and we are going to spell out what the paradigm is going to be. So
Hmm.
for them, for all the modernists, this instinct is really strong, and you can actually uh, spot the modernist by looking for this instinct of creating a new paradigm, and start to
Like a
categorize
new
something.
school of.
Yeah, give the future generations a new method, which is a break from the past, but also is a program for the future. So it's
Okay.
very projected into the future, is kind of contemptuous of the past. Like, they don't like the past, meaning they anything that is seen as passé, it's seen as a drag on progress.
Hmm.
And but also they say, this is what how things are going to be, and this is a new way of doing it. So that's a very important distinction that there is between the modernists and the postmodernists. And so I'll talk about the postmodernists in a second. But I wanted to stress out that the futurists are usually seen as, um, like they would inspire like what became fascism. So very kind of on
That's
one
yeah.
side,
That's yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you have on the other side, like you have what this is much later, but the Frankfurt School is also very modernist, especially Adorno, which I assume we're going to talk about.
Mhm.
Very modernist, meaning like also the past is a drag and we don't want to be the past anymore, but also this is what the future is going to be, and this is
Mhm.
what the right way of doing things is. So modernism is a good category because it really is present in different forms, but the impulse is there, no matter where or which political inclination you have.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, postmodernism is of course the word says it is it comes after, and not just after chronologically, but like it's really a reaction to modernism. And so this is also pretty early. I mean, this happens also, this is like that. I think the Dada movement, which the Dada movement is, can be considered postmodernist. Again, I'm not
Yeah.
a scholar on this, but this is
Mm-hmm.
my understanding. Um, the Dada movement is already present in the 20s, 1920s. The very first Dada movement. But then, of course, there are other incarnation of postmodernism. And so the difference between modernism and postmodernism there is postmodernists do not provide a way for the future. They don't think there is a clear way of making art in the future. They do think, like the modernists, that the past is past and we shouldn't repeat the past.
Mm-hmm.
They're less enthusiastic about the prospects of art in the future, and what they think their role is actually questioning what art is through art itself. So they actually produce works of art that are actually challenging what the very idea of art. And so that's a pretty loose and very kind of philosophical. It's like art becomes more of a philosophy, meaning asking questions rather than um, like a finished product, so to
Okay.
speak. I don't know if that makes sense, but I can provide some I can provide some examples, of course.
Yeah. Yes, please. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. So one another thing I want to mention before I talk about some examples is that, because one thing that is very present in modernism is that, yes, the past is past and canons are not relevant anymore, but technique is very important still. We still are very technical people as artists, meaning we develop new methods, we develop new um, techniques, and that's still something that we need to focus on. While the
I,
modern, yeah,
if I may interrupt, I've always had the feeling that there's is more, and it might just be sort of a growth out of the 19th century, ever since sort of like Beethoven, which is the sort of or even like Handel, that you have like the veneration of the individual, so that the individual who creates this new school, a new way of doing it, and everything before them stops, and then this new way of doing things starts with this certain artist or composer. I've always had the feeling that that sort of accelerated with modernism.
yeah. I mean, Beethoven is definitely, you can trace things back earlier than that at the moment. And Beethoven
Yeah, yeah.
is individualism and is kind of pushing the boundaries of musical form, and really like kind of in an almost provocative way of doing what you don't expect. Like that's
But
something
he's
that
still
is,
holding on to the past a
yeah.
lot. But I'm just saying it sort of came into this like cycle of people kept looking at the one individual and then saying, well, they sort of changed everything and we want to be more and more like that. I think maybe there's some sort of like natural evolution where that just kept happening until you got to the 20th century where people just said, I don't want anything from the past. I want to be a complete individual that starts everything from new all over again. I don't know if you agree or not, but that just sort of seems to be something that sort of happened in the 20th century.
Sure. So if you're saying that this is like something that has its roots in the past, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
But there is something that happens at the end of the 19th and beginning of 20th century, and it is a little more radical. Like, so
Yeah.
yes, the system was already sort of, and you think of Wagner too, like it's
Hmm.
the system was being pushed for sure. The meaning the canon was the compositional practice was being uh, pushed in a, you know I wouldn't call it progressive, but it was going somewhere. He had a direction.
Hmm.
But on the 20th century, like modernists that instinct becomes conscious. They actually start like thinking about this consciously. It's not like I'm writing a Tristan chord and that's, it's like, no,
Right.
I don't even want to deal with any of that, and we're gonna start it like from scratch. So
Hmm.
the starting from scratch is, I think, unique to the modernist mindset. And they say that because being modernist, they actually spell this out in manifestos. So you have many manifestos. Like that's a moment where artists would write their program of what they were about to do and why they were doing it. I don't think Beethoven ever wrote something like that. That
No, no,
yeah,
no. I'm just saying for the people who were looking at Beethoven, I'm just saying it's sort of like a person people like sort of a
yeah,
cycle of people looking at things that they, and then sort of it sort of devolved into the
yeah.
point where people were just, nothing from the past is let's dispense with everything and start new. I'm just trying to see like if there's some sort of like if this is
There
not just
is, there is.
like an artificial thing that happened or something that was a natural evolution or in some ways maybe in some sorts inevitable.
Well, yeah, I mean that's hard to say. It's a philosophical question. Like, but I think the technological advancement kind of sped things up because when you start seeing the world changing as much as it did in that moment, the perception that things were a change then became very strong. And again, artists are sort of interpreters of the zeitgeist, so like they kind of fleshed that out in but yeah, I mean it's a fair point. Where did things start? You can go
Mhm.
back even to the French Revolution if you want. Like that's, there are so many breaks of the traditional way of doing things that happened before that. Anyways, but the thing about technique, I think it's very important because the if you look at the modernist um, mindset and how the artist really is focused on a technique, although the technique is new and it's being created maybe in opposition with the past, is still a technique. And so for music, you have the 12 tone technique, which becomes a big thing. It is a big thing.
Mhm.
So um, the 12 tone technique, I don't think, do you have a video on the 12 tone technique? I don't think I saw
No,
it.
no, I just did a video on the Hauer's take on the 12 tone technique. The
Okay.
guy who claimed his whole life that he invented the 12 tone system, even though he has a different way of going about it. Um,
Yeah. And that's the
I
other
think he
thing.
did it like 2 years earlier. He published his, and then 1 year later,
Okay.
Schoenberg's came out. But they're very different. I actually think Hauer's might be more intriguing, but it's less of it probably leads to less mathematical. It would not have led to serialism,
Okay.
probably.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that,
Well,
but
he has pairs of hexachords. So he has a
uh,
hexachord scale, so 6 notes and then 6 notes. So he finds 6 notes that work with another 6 notes, and then 6 notes that work with another. So he takes 12 tones from each, but mixes them in a certain way that he has a scale of 6 notes here, and then the rest of the 6 notes and the 12 tone scale in this hexachord. And then I'm not an expert on it, but you can sort of uh, compose using those sets.
is there a rule for repetition in that technique against
Um,
repetition?
I think so. I have to I
Okay.
have to look at it again.
Because that's kind of like something that it's really encapsulates the modernist idea is that, yeah, it's the 12 tone technique to put it very simply, is like you play through the 12 tones in a specific order that you decide, and that's called the row, the 12-tone
Mhm.
row, and that's your choice. But you don't repeat a pitch unless you have played throughout the 12-tone row.
Right. Or
And
you can play it again, correct? You can play the same note again, but you can't.
again, yes,
Yeah,
exactly. And so
yeah.
why would that be? I remember when the first time I heard this, I was like, that seems a little random, a little kind of arbitrary.
Yeah.
Uh, and it is, I think. But one thing that's important is that
Well, didn't Schoenberg develop this system because he wanted there to be some framing? Because he didn't like that freely atonal had no sort of rules. He
yeah,
wanted to, yeah,
so
if I recall correctly.
the goal is kind of like, he has two main goals. One is to still give a framework for the composer to use, to still give like a key, right?
Hmm.
Something like a contained system, but at the same time deny a tonal center, deny a pitch, a hierarchy of pitch. So
Yeah.
pitch is not hierarchical anymore, meaning every pitch is as important as the next. Right, sort of like, yeah,
Democratize. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And that's why I kind of played very well for with the Marxist Frankfurt School, because I actually had some philosophical underpinnings to that too. But so, and doing that, it would deny tradition, because of course any music, traditional music, had some sort of hierarchy of pitch, some tonal center.
Hmm.
And so it's a good illustration, and you understand why it was so popular among modernists, because it at the same time undermines the past and provides a new way of writing, a new technique. So having said that, all of the 12-tone composers, and I've studied a few, they use very different ways of doing 12-tone.
Hmm.
So the most pure 12-tone, um, that I found, and the most successful, in my opinion, was one of Schoenberg's pupil, Anton Webern.
Webern, yeah.
So he
I was
has
just gonna
this,
ask if that's who you were gonna say.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He's like, he's busy. It doesn't have a huge repertoire. He was shot by an American soldier at some point.
That's right. We should explain that a little bit further, because if you just say that he was, I think it was they had like lights out or something. I forget, like a
Yeah,
mandatory blackout, and
yeah,
he walked out of his apartment and lit a cigarette. And
right,
I don't know, first
yeah,
that an American got trigger happy. What's new?
yeah. Kind of, yeah, the cigarette, yeah, I knew that. I knew that's probably at least, unless it's
But it's like 40 works, I think. It's all he wrote or something, 41 or something. Let me
yeah,
look
sounds
this
about
up.
right. Boulez recorded the whole Webern opus, and it was like, I think, 3 CDs, something like that. So but yeah, his music is kind of like, it's weird, because it's, you if you try to
Opus, okay, Opus 1 to 31, so 31,
okay,
not 41. So very, very little.
yeah,
How
um
old did how he wasn't very old either, like in his 40s, I think.
50, I think it
Okay.
was 50 something,
Okay.
but yeah. um
But I think this is where we should start getting to some, maybe to the like the what the video is called, is that we're
oh yeah, yeah,
composition
sorry,
and
sorry.
academia. No, no, but
Yeah,
I think all of this background is important, because this is I don't think it's at least from my experience, and you're currently in a different continent, but from what we've talked about with each other, it seems like the systems are very similar. um, or what is expected of composers is perhaps similar across the board in more, let's say, elite academies of music. I mean, your community
so
college in the US will let you, write whatever you want. They're not going to care. But if once you get to like
you
serious
yeah,
academies,
so it depends where you are. And it's hard to, I don't want to be, we have to make some generalization, because we are talking in general terms,
yeah,
so some generalization is impossible to avoid. of course, there are different schools. So, for instance, in the US, there was like East Coast and West Coast. Like the kind of cliche division where you had, and it's also, yeah, and then New York, which was kind of like a third thing. The East Coast was more kind of neoclassical,
Okay.
right?
So
And
based
the
around Boston, maybe?
no, the
That sort of
sorry, I said the East Coast, the West Coast was more
okay,
neoclassical. Yeah,
because that
and
sounds a little
yeah. The West Coast was more kind of, uh, yeah,
probably from all
maybe,
the film composers.
yes,
And I
exactly.
mean all of those late romantic a lot of the late romantic composers who were Jewish moved to um,
Yeah,
Los Angeles during the Third Reich
right.
to sort of escape what was going on, and they a lot of them
Yeah,
I think ended up being teachers to a lot of composers there. Like
yeah.
I think if I recall correctly, like Tedesco, who's a I kind of forgotten now. I don't know if you know Tedesco.
I don't
The
know.
I don't know,
I'm not an expert
but
on that.
very neoclassical composer, and lived.
Mm,
He died like in the '60s in Beverly Hills, and he wrote like a 24 preludes and fugues for two guitars, but it's all very neoclassical, so that
okay.
sort of checks out. And I think he briefly gave John Williams lessons, so
Oh, okay.
that all kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and also Stravinsky was lived in Los Angeles, is last part of his
Max
life,
Steiner, Korngold, and a
and
bunch of other
Schoenberg
people.
too,
Yeah,
and
and Schoenberg as
Schoenberg too.
well.
Yeah, he actually, if you go to UCLA, there is a statue of Schoenberg, if I remember correctly.
Or is it USC?
No,
Could
I
be
think
both.
UCLA. No, it's Schoenberg. Yes, it's called Schoenberg Hall. The
Yeah.
the music department is called Schoenberg Hall because I think he taught there. And Stravinsky and Schoenberg never met when they were in Los Angeles, which is interesting. Even though Stravinsky did write a few 12-tone pieces, which interestingly they sound like Stravinsky, even though
Okay.
even in 12 tones Stravinsky sounds like Stravinsky. It's interesting.
That is
um
interesting.
yeah,
I've never really gotten into those because I just think
they're cool.
I,
I mean,
okay.
I like Stravinsky in general, but so 12 tone you can use. Oh, but you wanted to talk about the
No, we have the
academic.
two coasts. Yeah, so we have the two coasts. You said so. You have the East Coast was more
Yeah,
divided between.
the East
Um,
Coast was more kind of 12 tone. So you have Babbitt, Milton Babbitt, um um a
I
few
mean, you have
others.
Bernstein, but he's more of like a pops composer in some
No,
ways. Yeah.
yeah, that's New. So New York has a scene of a minimalist scene, usually referred to as Bang on a Can.
Hmm.
That's a festival where they do, because Philip Glass has a lot of influence on that scene. So there is also the minimalist scene, which is yet another
And
sort
that
of.
and where would we put that? Would that be modernist or postmodernist?
I
See, this
have
is a
my
kind of yeah.
I have my take on this. I think minimalism is a reaction to modernist. I
So it's
wouldn't call it
postmodernist.
necessarily postmodernist
Okay.
because it's not doesn't have the philosophical things that and the questioning of the um, of the art
Post
form, but
post
it is a
ironic
reaction.
modernist. Post
Yeah, I
ironic.
mean, Philip Glass studied with Nadia Boulanger. So
Yes, I've heard this. Yeah.
Philip Glass used to write atonal stuff.
Hmm.
um and it became, so that's why I'm saying, and the music is pretty much, instead of having uh l- like undermining the tonal center and have like this random sounding music, even though you can develop a ear and hear like different, um it doesn't sound as random, especially if it's interesting. But the minimalist music is the opposite of that. You have a steady sort of harmony, and
Hmm.
it's played on process. I think I actually tend to like a lot of minimalist stuff because I like the idea of process as a compositional
No,
narrative.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's actually quite a lot of minimalist music that has quite a bit of merit. Um,
So in academia, what happens is that in the East Coast, especially, you have heavy sort of 12 tone influence music, and that kind of like it's supposed to be the most important academic scene, because the West Coast is not. It's
Yeah,
more
what do you have,
fun.
like Juilliard and Curtis, and what's the one in Boston? I think there's another not Berkeley, but there's like a conservatory or something. It's
New England Conservatory, yeah,
yeah,
but that for composition is not.
I don't
Yeah,
know, but
yeah,
I just know that Juilliard and Curtis are considered like some of the best music schools in the world, and they're
yeah,
both on the East Coast.
yeah. So yeah, Juilliard was Milton Babbitt was teaching at Juilliard, and Samuel Adler, which I think retired recently.
Okay.
Very good orchestrator. I did some. I studied with him briefly, but yeah, there are good people in that part. Even Milton Babbitt, whatever you think of his music, he was a great teacher. Like these people were like very good. They would give you a structure,
Hmm.
like a way, a framework, and you could develop some, like some skills within that framework. So can you write when you get into one of the schools whatever you want? Well, that depends on the school. Like I was allowed to write whatever I wanted. They would perform my pieces even if I wrote a minimalist piece, which was very much not in the aesthetic of my program. Yet, so this is going to what my kind of short essay videos are about. If you
Yeah,
do
I
write,
just want to mention there's a video I think my subscribers should watch on your channel called, I think it's the Adorno rule is what it's called, the
yeah,
video.
yeah,
And I think it's a very well laid out video. And you also did a podcast with Samuel Andreev. A lot of people in the sort of contemporary composition scene will know him. If they want to know sort of more about your thoughts on this, it's also a very interesting podcast to listen to that you did.
yeah.
What was? Do you know? Remember the when about the time you did that?
So what was after I did that Adorno video, which was, I think, was that during COVID? I think COVID
Yeah,
had something to do with it.
2021. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I got like, some time in my hands, and I was like, I'm just gonna say what I think it's happening, my experience, more kind of like from like it was a therapeutical sort of endeavor for me, because I got something off my chest. And I do think that a lot of people that come out of these programs, these composers that
So
get.
I think we should sort of shortly define what your viewpoint in that of that video
Yeah,
was.
so the video of the Adorno rule pretty much is that if you write music that doesn't sound academic, and by academic I mean that doesn't have this sort of adversarial character towards the audience. And so Adorno like pretty much made this explicit, saying that dissonance is the representation of truth in music. Whatever you can make of that what you will, I don't understand exactly what he means, but he sounds pretty convinced that music that it's more valuable has a lot of dissonance in it, and music that has any neoclassical reference is actually a reaction and a betrayal of the progress of music. So
Mhm.
I think that mindset is very much ingrained into the academic composition, especially of the East Coast, but also in Europe. I mean,
Yes,
I come.
I can confirm
uh,
it's the same
yeah,
situation in Vienna, very much so.
right.
At
And
least, yeah.
I know Italian composers. I studied, actually, I went to a summer seminar with this very important Italian composer who was the teacher of, an important guy. His name was Azio Corgi. And I actually got into a fight with him. Like, and people were looking at me like, "Are you crazy? This guy is the most important composer there is." But I was like, this is insane. Like, well, whatever, let's keep over
We'll
that.
get to that later.
Yeah.
I'm curious though.
Yeah, I remember like me and him yelling at each other in a bar in Siena. I was thinking about that now is funny, but anyways, because I like no one, and this guy is so important. And all right, so if you write music that it's not doing those gestures of like being very aggressively dissonant,
Mhm.
and not, I don't want to say pleasant, but like, I don't know, how would you describe it? Like a piece that it's not, that doesn't necessarily hit the audience in the face with, you know, very harsh chords or, sounds. If you don't
Mhm.
do that, then you're kind of like you're considered retrograde, you're considered
Oh, what's the word recently? No, continue. There's a word that they like to
like a
use
traitor.
often.
I don't know, but like, yeah, you're like, oh, you wrote that,
Yeah.
that triad there, like.
Hmm.
And so I think, and what I'm saying in that video is that um, it's become a limit for composers, because if I cannot do certain things, which are things that some who's not an academic composer might understand, if I do something outside of that language, I am out. You're not to be considered part of the clan, and it's becoming very sort of limited. And I, again, like at the end, I think I was right of my doctorate. I think I was writing music that was more valuable than the one that I wrote at the beginning, but my returns were diminishing, meaning like I wouldn't get as many performances. It just wasn't that relevant academically. And I at that point I got a little disillusioned about what the academic composition world was about, which I always thought, like, when there is value, no matter what the style is, you recognize that value.
Hmm.
um and it's not really like that. It's not really like that. So I am like, I mentioned this. I think I'm pretty naive. When I got into the program, I was like, I'm just gonna write whatever I want, and I'm not gonna worry about what happens.
I don't
But
think
yeah,
you're the only one, because this was the same for me when I started composing in my teens. And then you sort of it's like, I don't know, in your case, you might have been exposed to sort of dodecaphonic music earlier and atonal, but I wasn't until like I was like 15. I had no idea that this was going on in
yeah,
composition.
that's true for me too, pretty
Yeah.
much.
So
Yeah,
and then I didn't even like pay much attention to it until maybe 18, 19, when I started to have to sort of get into, take the exams to get into like conservatories here. And it just seemed so narrow, even like the entrance exams for conservatories and universities. And it just seemed like this is the only type of composition we want, is exactly what you were talking about. You can't even get into our program without, following this doctrine of composing. And
yeah,
to write anything that seems tonal in any way, or anything that would be pleasing to the audience, is naive, I guess.
yeah,
Naive or kitsch, or but
yeah,
what
yeah.
you were describing is that it's actually fundamentally connected to this theory, or postulation or whatever from Adorno, that you have to provoke the audience. And I think that actually goes back to uh, something some sort of like phrase the French had in the 19th century to provoke the bourgeoisie or whatever.
Épater les bourgeoisie.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
eat the bourgeois. Yeah, yeah, there is that for sure. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's describes it. Like, so you have to kind of punch the bourgeoisie in the face,
Yeah,
because we're not gonna give you comfort. We're not gonna give you something to evade from this world. We are going to give you the truth, right? So that's like a sort of like, again, a like writing music from a philosophical standpoint. Different from the postmodernist, which is even more, it's more contemplative, but it's like, this is what you're going to get from art now. And of course, it's influenced by World War II. Adorno said that writing poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric, meaning that for the Frankfurt School, the World War II was just a moment of break from anything that could be beautiful. So the idea
Mhm.
of beautiful was being completely undermined. And so beautiful was not the goal of the artist. The goal of the artist is truth. And what is truth in music? Truth in music is dissonance or this and that. Having said that, Adorno did not provide a nice, well wrapped system as people were, thought he was doing. Because he, at the end, like he said, 12 tone technique is what you should be using. Pretty much said that outright. And these composers, and these are talented composers like Boulez, Stockhausen, Luigi Nono, Maderna. These are good musicians. Like these are not like,
Yeah.
just winging it. They've
Mhm.
good ear. They, like Boulez was famous to have an amazing ear as a conductor. And they start writing 12 tone music. But of course, 12 tone music, it's kind of like, okay, you have this rule of not repeating the row, but then what do you do with it? So they started serializing also dynamics. So you have dynamics that cannot be repeated, articulations. So the staccato comes after you do the tenuto, like almost insane. So it
Well,
became
to me it seems almost it gets to a point where it becomes like a religion, and it's
yeah.
almost like the serialists are the most extreme form, like the people in the Black Plague who were whipping themselves over because that's going to protect them from the plague. I mean, that
Yeah.
might be a sort of strange, but it just seems to get to the point where it just seems like they're torturing themselves to write this kind of music. Although maybe
Yeah.
some of them love to do it. But I've always wondered about it, are there people who actually like sit in their living room and listen to Stockhausen or Boulez or Boulez?
Uh a Boulez, right? I thought.
I don't
But
know. I
yeah.
don't know.
I That's how I say it.
I
But
always said Boulez, but it sounded wrong for singing.
yeah, I think it's Boulez. But anyways, Boulez maybe. I think Boulez has some good music. Stockhausen
We have a
also.
comment here I want to read. Yeah, I gave up. Somebody wrote, "Yeah, I gave up from contemporary composition school because it's that zero regrets for me. It was full of ideology."
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would be curious to know which one. There are some that are more orthodox than others, but
Mhm. No, go ahead. You want to say something about Stockhausen?
no, I mean, depends. I think not all 12 tone or not all 8 tone music is bad. I don't think
No.
so. Like if you listen to the notation, the short piano pieces that Boulez wrote when he was like 21 or something, they're beautiful. They're very nice little pieces, and they actually follow. If you look at it, they are very structured. They're short. I think successful atonal music is usually pretty short,
Yeah.
and
I
that's
like
true
the
for.
like the Webern piano pieces.
Right. The
Those-
Webern
yeah.
pieces, because it's a lot to take in a way.
Mhm.
And anyways, but like there is one that it's a canon, like a canon at the 16 note, like so they have a canon that is just 1/16 note apart. So they have some interesting. They come up with interesting solutions to give like a unified form, a unified sense of a piece of music without using any repetition or tonal center. So
Mhm.
I think that is an interesting area to explore, and you can make good music with that for sure. It's they're taking it as the gospel, they're taking it as the only way of doing things that I think is wrong.
Mhm.
And the idea that you have to use a pretty abstract intellectualized system of writing music, because I mean tonality came out of centuries of practice, right? It didn't come out as now we're gonna do a 5/7 resolving to a 1 with like the 7. No, it just came out like it organically developed, right?
Mhm.
While the 12th tone is like, this is a rule and you're gonna follow it. And so postmodernists now make more sense in hindsight, because Cage said, you know what, this rule is kind of like weird. And he said famously, he said, it gives us, the 12 tone technique gives us the bricks, but not a plan. So what do
Mhm.
we do with this? Like, it's not clear. So he
Mhm.
said Cage was actually had some foresight, again, more of a thinker than a musical thinker. He wrote music that is interesting, but his great contribution is like sort of like a his philosophy in a way. And he rejected this very rationalistic approach to composition and said, I'm not going to do that, and I'm actually going to do something completely different, and he does a silent piece and things like that are interesting, even though they are not necessarily music.
He did the metronome thing, right? With the
He did the
or was that
metronome
some?
thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
It-
I don't know what it's called anymore.
yeah. Mm.
I don't know. What I've always sort of wondered, because you also discussed this in your podcast with Andrew, is that um, that is how you pronounce his name, I assume.
Andreev. Yeah.
Yeah, he you sort of discussed the sort of the this academic type of music. It does have its sort of roots in Marxism and sort of leftism and whatnot. And that it was also sort of a reaction to the horrors of the Second World War and fascism, and that we can't write music like we did before the war anymore. We have to do something new. So I've heard that argument actually said a lot, and then also people, let's say, on sort of more uneducated people who, like, so on the conservative or right wing side of things, who just say, oh, it's, cultural Marxism or Frankfurt School, and don't really know much more than that. But and it's just leftism in general. And then I think, well, at the other end of things, you have in the Soviet Union music that's being produced, and inarguably a much more Marxist political system than what was happening in the West. Music that's decidedly much more tonal than what was going on in the serious music of the West. So I've never been convinced by that argument. I just think it's an opinion.
The argument that is Marxist.
Yeah, that it's just
Okay.
that, sort of left wing or Marxist thinking is, that's going to lead you to this type of music, when you have an example of it not doing that in a completely different political system. Now, we discussed this before, that it might be because of, the iron fist of Stalin keeping things
Yeah.
back. But
Well,
I'm not
I mean,
entirely sure it was just only that.
I think for academia, so the video that I made is called the Adorno rule, and I think Adorno is a central figure in this,
Yeah.
because of what, like, the most important composers of the 60s and 70s were completely influenced by Adorno, and they say so. It's not like my assumption. They actually completely acknowledge the importance that Adorno had on their writing. And this is Boulez, this is Nono, this is Stockhausen, and these are the people that really shaped composition of Europe and the US, because Babbitt, it's coming from that. Elliot Carter, um, which I think is one of the better examples of modernist writing. They came from that mindset. And so, I mean, if you talk about who's the better Marxist, I don't know, but
Yeah.
right. And Stalin became a sort of like it's called Stalinism. It became his own sort of version of Marxism, which,
like Juche in North Korea, that sort of thing. Think
right.
of that
And
idea.
it was very nationalist in many
Yeah.
ways. So he was very Russian. Like, even though he was from Georgia, he was like he was promoting like a Russian way of doing things. And
So
he
that's been always my question. I'm sorry, if,
yeah.
sorry for interrupting, but that's always been my question. Is there some sort of uh, international component to this sort of Adorno way of composing? That it's just sort of it's completely decoupled from the folk and
Yeah,
tradition and everything.
it is.
Um,
It is decoupled. That's the right word. Because they at some point, and you see this in the other Frankfurt people like Marcuse, they think that the people, the masses, are to be educated, cannot be catered to, and
mhm.
you kind of have this to disregard their taste, because those are the masses are more interested in comfort, and they will accept capitalism as a way of getting their life better, like to have more comfort, to
Okay.
have, and so they disregard that as something that should be facilitated, and instead they want to go against that. So in that sense, Russia was a communist country, while Europe and the US were not, and so they were fighting against this idea.
Hmm.
So that's the political agenda, but in practical terms, that resulted into this adversarial sort of nature of music, which like the common folk would just kind of be repelled by, just
Hmm.
because it doesn't sound anything, it doesn't contain any of the harmonies that are sort of natural to the harmonic series, and it will kind of play against that. And so yeah, so that's the influence of Adorno is huge, and there are reactions to it which are taken from the postmodernists. So
Hmm.
again, you see the friendship between Cage and Boulez deteriorate like in real time through their letters, because Cage says, I don't really want to do this kind of hyper rationalist structuralist. And Adorno at the end actually criticized that too, interestingly. He actually said, the music that you guys are making, Boulez and Stockhausen, it's not what I meant. And it's not clear what he meant, but like he didn't buy this hyper structuralist thing. Even
Hmm.
Adorno didn't buy it. So there was a crisis, and so it's been kind of like it's been problematic. But so fast forward to today, maybe that's might be interesting for people that are studying composition now. What do you have? Well, you have in academia, you have strong influence of composers like Ferneyhough,
Hmm.
who's this what do they call it? I think they call it hyper complexity or something like that. There is a name for
Okay.
it, like a new kind of a new catch word for catchy word for this new style, which is as far as I can hear, just kind of like a reiteration of the hyperstructuralist. Like he would write like a 7 tuplet within a 10 tuplet within a 13 tuplet, sort of
Okay,
like
and
have
I
you
guess without an electronic instrument, that sort of gets to the point where it's almost impossible for musicians to
It
play, right?
is. It is
Yeah.
straight up impossible. But they still write this. He still writes this kind of music, and there are composers that write this kind of music. And then it's kind of like maybe one of the ideas is to
New
make some
new complexity.
new
Somebody's writing.
complexity. Yeah,
Yeah.
new
Thank you.
complexity. And so like the tension that you engender in the performer by writing this nested multiple compound tuplets and things like that, it's transmitted by like, I don't know, the tension of the performer is felt by the audience, which
Okay.
it's I mean, it's weird, but I think that's part of the reason why they do that.
Okay.
And so, and to me, that's not a surprise. That's not like, oh, and it's not new either. It's not new.
Mhm.
It's just hyperstructuralism 2.0, without maybe the rule of the the serialization of pitch or serialization of rhythm, serialization. I don't think he uses that. I'm not, really an expert on Ferneyhough, but the result is that kind of chaotic uh, uh, music. And the other one is Lachenmann, which I also mentioned in my videos, which instead of doing this hyper complexity, what Lachenmann does is write for instruments in a very unconventional way. So you see a violinist having like a piece of paper and scrubbing the paper on the bridge, generating like a very faint sound or something like that, or not just extended techniques, what they're called extended techniques, but like really extended techniques, like things that
Okay.
are really, so you have to write like an essay at the beginning of the piece for the
Right.
performance notes, sort
Yeah,
of.
I've seen that before. I also saw somebody here who like rubbed sandpaper on bark in the woods, and that was his piece.
Right. And I've
Yeah.
I've listened. So I was in Boston for a while, and I went to Harvard concerts. I was living close to Harvard,
Okay.
and they just hired this new composer at the time, um, who is a follower of Lachenmann. And so all of the students that came in, that's what I'm saying. Like, so there were students who were already there when she got hired, and so they were writing different kinds. But when she came in, all of the students that came in as a generation, like a new PhD students, were all writing in that style. You could not write in another style.
Yeah.
And so you
I
will
mean,
see
I was
concerts
once. Yeah.
of like someone with a hair, like with a paintbrush doing this on a marimba, producing zero sound. But and I was like, okay, that's you do that, do you do you, right? But
Mm.
don't do it for 15 minutes because that's just annoying. But anyways,
No, but I've come to the sense where I had like I had many years ago, like a decade ago almost. I knew somebody who got into the like one of the conservatories where I am, and he and I asked him, I was like, "What are you learning? Like composition technique? Are you learning like harmony or just like counterpoint or stuff like that?" And he just said, "No, that's all. My professor has told me we have to look to the future."
yeah.
And that seems to be like a thing. Well, your professor is you're not you're actually going to be the future, not your professor. But I've it seems to
Yeah,
me like they're instilling a revolutionary spirit when it's no longer the revolution's over. They've sort of won the academic battle, I'd say.
I
Maybe
kind
not
of,
for the not for the masses, perhaps, but
you know
academically, I think they do have quite a monopoly.
yeah, and I kind of see um why they would say and do things like that in 1965
Right,
to,
right.
but now it's been like 50 years of this. And so my the point of my videos is like, all right, you have done this, right? So we had generations of students, of composers coming out of academia doing this kind of music. What do we have? So I have a video that's called contemporary music masterpiece. And my point is that there is no contemporary music masterpiece, right?
Yeah.
There is no rite of spring of contemporary music, like something that you are sure it will stay because it's such a clearly a masterpiece that
Yeah.
I
I
don't think
think
there is.
didn't Thomas Beecham say something like this? We don't have a serious work from the last 50 years that's people will, are as cherished as the Magic Flute or Rigoletto or
Yeah.
by uh, sort of the common man. But he's sort of like of an old school that was not in this mindset that we have to, you know, because that's often like something. it's influenced our society so much that you'll get artists that, and I made a whole video about this once, that aren't sort of have received the political dogma. Just our society has imparted this sort of opinion, like I make the art for myself and I don't care about the audience. Whatever, it's there's no thought that people will actually have to sit and listen to whatever it is you've created or look at your canvas or whatever. It's just sort of, whatever, which I've always found like that's part of being an artist is you need that aspect, but the other aspect is you do, as you said, at least the modernists did have a lot of technique. I mean, if you look at Schoenberg and Webern were extremely competent orchestrators, arrangers, and wrote. We talked about this yesterday.
Yeah.
Um, sort of wrote actually, fairly complex late romantic pieces that are actually quite pleasant to listen to. So they knew what they were doing. These were not like frauds. But I do have and I'm going to be quite honest. I do have the appealing the feeling that there's a lot of composers now that just don't that write that almost as a crutch or a way to get away with not being competent.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
I think so. I think so. So you have Picasso. Picasso wrote like those sketches, weird sketches, but Picasso could draw like a master, right? So
Right.
and you can actually see that when he does the simple 2-line drawing, you can actually feel like the heavy,
Yeah, but
the
even his weirdest stuff, Picasso has it because he's trained himself. The
yeah,
aesthetics of it are interesting. And I saw an do you know Mondrian, Pierre
yeah,
Mondrian,
yeah,
with the squares.
yeah.
I saw an exhibition of his like 15 years ago in Vienna. Not of he's been dead forever, but that they'd done of his work. And what was fascinating was he's actually the same sort of thing. He came from this sort of like very classical background of how he was painting. And they did this one sort of sequence of he had painted a tree and then he painted the negative space in between the branches, just the negative
Uh-huh.
space. And then he abstracted the negative space into like circles, and then those became squares, and then the last painting was one of his, square things. But as anybody could say, well, I could just anybody could do a Mondrian with a ruler and a paintbrush, but I, he was the only one who did that way because there was this whole like process that got him
Yeah.
there, and it came from a place of probably tradition and also understanding,
Yeah,
the canon.
but you see, like that's actually a very good example because I think in people like Mondrian, you see the modernist instinct
Drive,
of
yeah.
hyper rationalization. That's kind of exemplified by his paintings. Like when you simplify everything to its smallest component, and eventually you end up with something as simple as lines intersecting. That's actually like that's what sometimes makes modernist art so not appealing because it kind of takes away all of the nuance that makes something emotionally engaging, like the hyper rationalism of modern artists, which they take as a sign of pride. So we're actually doing this because, and they have an explanation for it. It's, to me, like, if to bring in my opinion, I think it's not good because if you start bringing art, which is something that should be instinctive, it should be understood holistically without any mediated rational explanation. When you start breaking it down into categories and saying these are the rules and these are this and that, then you kind of break the magic of it. And
Mhm.
again, like if you're saying, well, but there were rules in the past, but I see those rules as coming out of a organic practice rather than a theoretical. Then you can write down the rules, but then like it's more like an after the fact kind of thing rather
Mhm.
than we are going to write what we're going to do and then we're going to do it, because It's like I'm going to tell you why I make this joke, and then I tell you the joke. It's not funny, like if it's,
Yeah.
you can't do that. It just doesn't happen like that. It has to be alive. It has to be something that it's happening in the moment. And so
Okay.
I think, yeah, I think we are not in a good moment in that sense.
And I think what I want to also discuss before we end is that you had um, not you, but basically what I've also come across with in academia is that there's a huge importance put on Darmstadt as like the center of, okay, we have the second Viennese school, and then there's Darmstadt. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people know the second Viennese school, but you have to sort of go like another layer into like composition academia to then find out about Darmstadt. Because what I always found like bizarre is that there's composition students here in Austria who are like taking the train to Darmstadt to take lectures there. And then I was thinking back then, I was like, well, you're in Vienna and you're going to Darmstadt? To me, it's like you're in like the city of composers, and you're going to Darmstadt, because at the time I didn't know. Oh, this is this like huge important place for modern stuff. So I think a little discussion of why Darmstadt is so important is, I think,
Yeah.
important, because I think it also there also should, maybe people in the comments will can dig into who funded those, why were they done, because anybody who's into like music knows you need money and support behind certain things.
Yeah.
Um,
Institutional money and
you
support.
need
Yeah.
institutional and not not just a little. You need a lot to get something like Darmstadt to take over the way it did. So I'd be curious how much it was artificially pushed and not. But that's this is just theorizing. I don't think that's important. At first, I think it's important to discuss what exactly happened in Darmstadt, which I think you're not exactly. You've said to me not so much of like a encyclopedic expert on it, but you do know
No, I'm not.
definitely a bit more than I
Yeah,
do.
so I know Darmstadt is sort of like Mecca for contemporary classical, I guess. And it's again Mecca because something happened in Darmstadt that was seminal for a lot of composers. So again, like the important names of um, this academic classical music, whatever you want to call it, are Boulez, Stockhausen are probably the most important. Stockhausen
Mhm.
is referred to as the greatest of these. Sometimes I heard. I don't know if that's true,
More
but it
than
was
Boulez, more than Boulez.
sometimes, yes, because
Okay.
Boulez kind
Okay.
of stopped writing at some point. He kind of wrote like he would write this piece where like sur, like ansis, like so he wrote a piece on cis and then wrote sur and cis. Like he kind of rewrote the pieces that he wrote when he
Oh,
was,
okay.
you
Okay.
know, and he became more of a conductor than a composer. Stockhausen kind of became this crazy, like he was also very eccentric. He would claim that he came from another planet. Seriously,
Yeah, Sirius, right?
seriously,
Yeah,
like
or
it was
yeah, the
probably,
Sirius star system or something he came from,
yeah, it was
I
probably
think.
schizophrenic, my guess. But it no, seriously, I think. But
Yeah.
he was considered to be, and he did wrote like a couple of pieces that are kind of impressive if you listen to. One, it's called Mantra, I think. I
Yeah, I've heard
listened
of
to
that. Yeah.
two pianos. I heard it performed at Harvard, and that like that's one of the pieces where if you're a pianist, it's like if you do that, kudos to you. Like those
Okay.
are hard, like long pieces, and so he definitely has merit. Like he did write interesting stuff. Um, and so he was there as a young person, and Boulez was there. Maderna, who's kind of forgotten today, was a very good composer. Maderna, very good orchestrator. Like he would write these contemporary pieces, like very avant-garde, but for orchestra, which is not easy to do. To write like a complex piece for an orchestra. It's usually you write for small ensembles, solo pieces, because complexity, it's easier to manage in a small ensemble. But an orchestra, but so Maderna, who died very prematurely, was one of them, and so they got to these lectures from, and I looked at Wikipedia, I have to admit, before the stream, it was from 54 to 58 that
Were those
where Adorno
okay?
gave these lectures, and especially one
Hmm.
year where, like, because there were conflicts between these composers. What, like, Boulez was hyperstructuralist, and so, like, some other people were like, no, this is too fixed. I need some freedom, right? You can't just write, because for the hyperstructuralists, you just write a series and then you pretty much flesh out the algorithm. You don't have a lot of say into writing different notes, because you have to follow the row. You have to follow all of the different. Anyways, and so uh, Adorno gave these lectures where he pretty much said, "This is what you should be doing," and this was at Darmstadt, right? And so I came across this
Yeah,
because,
I'd be so curious who organized these because you need.
I mean,
I
who
mean,
organized
somebody's.
the Frankfurt School?
Yeah.
You never know.
No,
Like, this is
but
post-war. It's that there's
somebody wrote in the comments something about a particular three-letter agency in the U.S.
I was gonna say
But
that. Yeah.
yeah, that might be behind it. But I will also mention that Darmstadt was in the American occupied zone of Germany, and
Ah, interesting.
we'll leave it at that.
Interesting. I mean, there is something going on there for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah. So that was influential, and that's what we are, left with. And I don't think we have progress as so much from then. Like, right now, I don't know what's going on right now in in graduate composition schools in the US.
I've looked now and then. I've looked at like websites just to see what like the kind of output like composer recitals they'll put online, or they'll put like live streams on YouTube of certain like more prestigious academies. Most of the time, I'd say it's um, very much still of the sort of composition I'd personally
I would
prefer to
expect
sort
that.
of
Yeah.
like bad modern or bad like Darmstadt wannabe music. Um,
Yeah, no,
but
Lachenmann is very big. I heard a lot of Lachenmann pieces. So many, too many. And it should be like, it's something that it's interesting in certain cases. And Lachenmann did write, like, there was a piece that I heard that was interesting. It was like just playing with the resonance of the piano. So there are, like, the pianist holds down some chords and then hits like a cluster in the low register, and then you hear this halo of resonance coming out. And little by little, you would hear this chord progression of just resonances with this
okay.
interrupted by the. So it's kind of like sometimes you do get interesting effects, right? And
That's what I want to say. There's something I would not discount, and even though I really am not a fan of this music and don't support it continuing like this for the next, I don't know how long they want to keep doing music like this. Um, but I there have been like extended techniques, I think is the correct term, that have come out of these schools that are now and then actually quite interesting for effects that you can use.
yeah, yeah,
Although
yeah.
I probably think of them as things you could probably use more sparingly than they do, but it seems more like they're like in a laboratory, seeing how they can mix certain sounds together, which has its merits. But at the end
Yeah,
of the
I
day, I
mean,
do think, yeah,
the
yeah,
snap pits or Bartok pits, the
hmm
snapping, that was an
hmm
extended technique. Like, now
yeah,
it's not considered anymore. So it's not like it's bad to do extended techniques. I think it's what's bad is to do it for, just, this is, I'm only going to do extended techniques. That's all
hmm
I'm going to do. Like, that's because
Or
why?
I've written the 10 trillionth prepared piano piece.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, I see that all the time. It's whenever they come and start putting stuff in the piano, I just think, ugh, again.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not as cool as you might think. I think.
Yeah, well, I think it's like things they learn how that this is a thing they can do, and then it just.
Yeah.
I mean, I tried. I mean, one of the pieces I did to try and get into one of the conservatories here used that because I wasn't going to get in with tonal music. So I did. I put like those Gillette razors that have like they don't do anything. They just vibrate.
Uh-huh. Okay.
You can. I don't know why it was a gimmick. I think because I don't think you can get them anymore.
Okay.
And it was just sitting around, and I threw that in the piano, and it sort of clinked around on the strings, and I
Okay.
held the pedal down, and they like that.
Of course.
That's the only
Of
thing they
course.
like.
Of course.
They found that
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of value in, if you ask me, in going to like a program, like a graduate program or whatever, where they perform your music. I think there is nothing as important for a composer than having listening to your pieces performed. You learn
Mm.
so much from that. It's invaluable, and it cannot be replicated by anything else.
You
You
can't just
have
read a book too and
no.
know how to write. Like I remember I wrote something where I had winds, and I had a tenor saxophone part, and it was only until we got to recording it that I realized, oh, tenor sax is really loud.
Yeah,
It's it's louder than the trombone and trumpet, and
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 it
so
doesn't blend with anything. It
yeah,
sticks out.
just
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So I those are things you can kind of only learn from
yeah,
experience.
yeah. I have students, composition students. They're undergrads, and they tend to rely a lot on the playback on of
Yeah,
MuseScore or whatever. And my biggest challenge is to say, don't play back. Just
yeah.
it's better if you just don't listen to it because it will just get your ideas completely wrong about what it will sound like.
Also, the colors will also be all wrong.
Yeah, especially
I think
strings.
it's
It's just
I
a
think
lot
it's I think
stress.
it yeah, it's better just to work out your if you want to hear them, work them out
Yeah,
on the piano, or um if you have like a pad where you can play the strings,
yeah.
or even better if I have like a cheap organ from the 80s I got at a thrift store, but it has pedals and two manuals, so I can so you have the
I mean, the
sustained
best
notes
thing.
because the piano doesn't do that. An organ does that. It
Yeah,
sustains notes.
the best thing is to get the pitches if you need them,
Mhm.
and then just try to
Right.
hear it. It's not easy, but it is a muscle that you can develop.
Yeah.
And it would be very hard to do. So the Lachenmann people do is actually get the instrument, and that's actually not a bad idea of whatever you are writing for. Even if you're
Okay.
not a violinist, get a cheap violin somewhere and just get the sounds in your ear by grabbing the instrument. That's actually something that it's good to encourage, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Probably.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You don't have to do weird, like scratching things, but to get the instrument and know
Right.
what it sounds like. And if you're a composer, it's good to play multiple instruments, I think, too, even if you don't play well.
Well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Somebody wrote here. I think it's a good comment. Perhaps we are in a time of consolidation and maturation, rather than progress. Maybe.
I
I
mean,
do think it's more chaotic at the moment, to be honest.
to be honest, this is like something that I point out in the videos. I am against the idea of progress in music because I think it's a simplification of everything. There is like so the idea have that Adorno went for. It sounds like very complicated, but it's actually a simplification of everything, because you say, like, so because you had Palestrina at the beginning who only did perfect intervals, then you have Bach that did triads and sevenths, but like, and
Mhm.
then so more dissonance, and then you have Wagner, and so that means that the way forward is dissonance, and that's like a linear interpolation of progress. So this is the beginning, this is the middle point, this is where we are now, so it means that the future is just a straight line,
To
like
more and more dissonance, yeah.
yeah, in statistics you do the linear like interpolation of points and you say where
Mhm.
it's pointing. So it's like the scientific approach to art, which I find it so wrong and so simplistic. Like, so this is this and this is that, and so that means that we're gonna go there. It's like, first of all, why would you want to necessarily want to be always projected to the future? Like, what was this fascination with the future that we have, that like everything has to be, what's the next thing going to be? I
Mhm.
don't have that. Like, I don't like, even though I like technology, like to work with technologies, just because to me that's a toy that I play with. Like, it's not like really because I think that's a new thing. It's just that when you get a piano, you get the piano, then you get a lot of composers writing for the piano, but they don't write thinking of like the future. They just write what they have as an instinctive sort of creative impulse on a new instrument, which happens to be exciting just because there's a new sonority.
Mhm.
And so when you grab a new instrument, I always get excited. Like, how do I play this?
Here's a question maybe you can answer. I'm going to show it on screen. You should. s-
Oh, classical meaning Mozart and
Yeah,
Haydn.
I suppose, yeah. Is it okay for composers to go back to a classical style?
I mean, I whatever whatever
Yeah,
floats your boat, like,
I,
yeah. I
I
mean,
think that
can you
somebody
write
also
better?
wrote,
Yeah.
"It's wrong if you can't do it well." I think the idea is like, well, that's not really the time we live in anymore. At some in some sense, and the way they were educated, those musicians, I don't think very many people are educated that way anymore in music,
No.
where you just don't go to school. You don't learn algebra. You don't learn geometry. You just do music from the time you're, 9 years old. And
I
I
mean,
mean, not in every case, but the type of education in music has changed to a degree where I don't think it's actually possible to be a convincing classical composer
I
in
mean
that
that kind.
sense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that kind of music is gone. Meaning, it really was a part of that sentiment. Like, we don't think like that anymore. We don't think that we don't have
And
that.
you could
Like,
do it as an exercise in form. Like I wrote a Baroque suite, but I just did that at the time to exercise Baroque dances, so I understood what they were. And I liked the pieces that came out of it, so I had it recorded. But other than that, I'm not, it's not
yeah,
something I'd consider like my piece, and that it's, I even though I wrote every note of it, it's not the same as something that I consider more like
yeah.
purely mine.
I mean, I think it's something I read in a book recently. Is that we tend to think the idea of thinking of music, like music that it's produced today, as being the same thing, the same art form as music produced by Mozart or Bach. It's wrong, because the fact that they consist of sounds, the only, like, so Mozart is more related to a painting of his time than it is related to a piece of music today.
Yeah.
Meaning that's it's the spirit that it's captured, that the in that time exists on different art forms. The fact that we connect the music of, I don't know, Dr. Dre to Mozart, there is just a different thing. Like, it's they don't they're they don't match in any
Well, this
way.
is this is. I mean, you don't have to agree, but I think a lot of composers are coming. So it's the ones who are not sort of into still in the sort of like Darmstadt Adorno dogma. who are trying to think about where things could go. I'm just sort of the opinion that fundamentally there's a misunderstanding about what classical music is. Firstly, I think just calling it classical music as what we do is kind of incorrect. But then, what do we call it? Serious music, I guess, or it reduces it just to a genre, which is one
Yeah,
problem.
which is
When
not.
it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, does that is you know is does that mean Gregorian chants or classical music? What where
Yeah.
does classical music begin and where does it end? And anyways, that's one issue. But what I've always felt is like it's come to this like sort of development that a lot of it doesn't exist anymore in the way it used to work with music, and that a lot of things that developed that were like strict rules came out of for like church music, how you'd
Mhm.
write chorales for the church, and that sort of was incorporated and then into how people wrote music that wasn't for the church, sort of um, for the like vernacular for the public, and instrumental music that did not have text, and then those started adopting sort of folk characteristics, and that all sort of mixed together. And I think what also happened in the 20th century, not just the sort of explosion of technology, maybe there is a role of the sort of the academic conservatory that I don't think really
Yeah.
existed the way it did. If you, I, you probably know because you're Italian more about how the first conservatories I do believe were in Italy.
Yeah, actually, funny story. It was this is I I found out recently. In the word comes from Naples, where the orphans were kept into houses called conservatori, means to keep them like alive,
Yeah,
and it was a like a tradition that orphans would study music. There was.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a book by Gierdingen about the techniques that child composers would learn, or orphaned composers.
So they're
It's
like,
kind of
you're
yeah.
an orphan, nobody is here for you, you might as well be a musician.
Well,
Also
the
tells you,
creative, yeah, yeah.
how, like, now we think of musicians, and this is Beethoven's fault, by the way, as this high important figures, composers. Before they were just, just it was just a job,
Servants, yeah,
like servants, like
yeah.
actors. Same thing. We elevate these figures to even Mozart. I mean, Mozart was important and famous in his time, but he didn't think of himself. I don't know, as what we think of him, which is
Yeah, yeah,
not
like,
right.
yeah, one of the greatest
Yeah.
artists to ever live, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
right. Like almost like a divine figure, right? So, um,
Whereas I think Maria Theresa thought they were like vagabonds when they came to her court.
really,
Yeah, it's like dirty actors, like the same sort of
yeah, they were low class. I mean, they were.
like I don't know if you've seen Hot Fuzz, crusty jugglers. Like
No, where's that?
no, Hot Fuzz, it's a movie, but
Oh,
they refer to like the juggler in town as a crusty juggler.
yeah. I mean, yeah.
That's sort of like uh, sort of circus type character. Maybe not that terribly because they obviously had music
No,
was important, and I think that's also a misinterpretation. But it was not like Mozart was not like Beyonce in his time.
not at all.
Yeah.
And Beyonce is not Mozart. I think we.
Yeah. No, that's not what I was saying. I was just saying
No,
like
but
the brand, the image, like
right, right.
something like
No, but you were
IKEA or
saying about the
McDonald's.
institution. So I think that is an important topic.
Yeah,
And I don't
because
know. Yeah,
yeah, you have the development of the church and then also the vernacular and the folk and the instruments and then the courts also the the sort of aristocracy that would support and finance the musicians. At the
right,
beginning of the 20th century, most of the European aristocracy was deposed of power, at the latest after the Second World War. So that was one area that was important to
yeah.
how composition existed. The church has lost a significant amount of power
Oh
since
yeah,
the beginning of the 20th century.
yeah.
Um, and so and then the folk, the vernacular lives on, but it's become like the mainstream type of music because that's what can be reproduced and recorded. So what happened is I almost see like the academic composer as a new thing. Like we're trying to
It is,
keep
yeah.
something alive, but we also want to reject everything that came before. But at the same time, we're training our students to, you know, be competent in this bourgeois music.
So I think,
You know?
to put it simply, what happened is that we we came from a patronage
Yeah.
system, with the church and aristocrats who wanted to pretty much increase their prestige and their their reputation by hiring this talented artist, and kind of have that art reflect on themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
As to
It's
so that's
unpaying, yeah. Yeah.
right. And they were interested in the quality of art and in its kind of more esoteric traits, meaning like the art that really could transmit something metaphysical, to like where you would be just impressed by the art, right? To a system, I think today, which is more bureaucratic. So it's like you are in an institution where it's a bureaucracy, and bureaucracies work as bureaucracies, meaning they have an input and they have an output, and they have a process in between. And so
Mhm.
their output is it's pretty much geared towards its self-preservation. I think this is probably the most controversial thing that I point out in my uh, little silly videos, is that this is the bureaucracy tends, like, its main interest is to be alive. And so if you produce things that are, if you produce a composer that goes on and becomes like a very important film composer or commercial composers, the bureaucracy will not, gain anything from that.
Mhm.
Because the composer will go outside of this circle, and it's not necessarily, the bureaucracy works with like keeping things within itself, sort of thing. I mean, I'm not sure if that makes sense, but it's not necessarily something that is producing things for everybody, but it's producing things just for itself.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so institutions create a network of institutions where they make themselves necessary, because then, like, if an institution produces composers that write music for the commercial market, why do you need the institutions to in the first place? The commercial market can take care of that.
Right.
So you need to make something that is specific to that, which is just the academic composer, which and
But that bleeds
yeah,
into, but the academic, but I think this is something we've not gotten into, is that the academic composers often that bleeds into who gets the commission from the local symphony orchestra or
yeah.
who gets and um, I don't know why they keep doing this because if you read comments, if you read online, if you go online, people who cancel their like um, their what's it called, their subscription with their local orchestra or whatever. um, they'll say, well, I hate it when the second half is some modern piece I can't listen to. And I haven't, I mean, that was what my parents did once, but it's not just from my parents that I've heard this. I've seen this like
No,
comment
yeah, yeah,
all the
that's
time.
common. Yeah.
It's very, very common. And it makes me wonder, it's like, well, okay, or and then on the other end, they'll just play like Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony every second concert. They'll just do like the same pieces over and over again, and then this like random modern piece that doesn't. To me, it seems like there's almost zero business sense in the classical world at the moment, too.
Right. It's not oriented towards that. Also, it's like, from a financial point of view, is not really a thriving business because it's very expensive,
Hmm.
and the ticket returns are never enough to really make up for expenses. So orchestras and all these institutions need money from funding from someone, and
Right.
usually there are private donors, but it's
Mhm.
usually it's another kind of step in the bureaucratic direction. Like
So state
they're not
grants.
catering to the public, they're catering to someone up there, to like and it's not a patron that will be benefiting from the high art that is produced, because it's kind of like a bureaucrat that it's
It's
a
a
face,
nameless
it's
nameless,
face,
faceless
yeah,
bureaucrat. Yeah.
right. And so that there is no interest in that sort of thing. There is more interest in saying uh some other programmatic things. So like, I mean, there are several explanations that you can make, but like one thing that I point out is like, we are doing this music because it's different from commercial music, because our music is actually advancing
Yeah.
music, like something that you cannot prove, because I
But
mean,
then
how
you
do you
see,
do that?
I mean, it's not quite the case in Europe yet, or at least where I am in Europe, because music is still quite cherished where I am. But because I'm also an American by birth, I do spend time in the US, and I have seen that there are more and more like smaller symphony orchestras that are just struggling to
Yeah.
survive. And
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not very optimistic about that. It's even operas. I like opera a lot, and if you go to operas recently, um, it's very hard to find good singers, good orchestras. There are some,
Mhm.
but it's just a financially losing sort of endeavor.
Yeah,
Um,
and I don't think this type of composition is particularly helping the market.
that's the thing. That's the thing. That's the thing that kind of it upsets me, because the one thing that should be help could be helpful for this is injecting new blood into the system by writing music that is actually exciting and uses like the orchestra effectively,
Yeah. Or
and
instead of people, just clacking on their keys on the,
and
clarinet.
ju- instead of
Yeah.
saying like to the audience, look, you just don't understand this, because that's the message that
Yeah, you're not intellectual enough to
I'm
understand.
sorry, if you don't like it, it's because you don't understand it.
Yeah.
And there are some people that don't like Mozart, or they don't like
Yeah,
masterpieces, and
fine. Yeah.
but there are people that are actually very well educated and they know music. They just hate you know the most contemporary music, and so it's their fault that they don't like it. I mean, I don't enjoy it, and I'm musically educated. I
Yeah,
don't
it's the
enjoy
same with
most
me,
of it.
yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't know. Maybe
Somebody's
I'm
asking, how can one not like Mozart? Well, that's a different topic.
what?
Somebody asked, how can one not like Mozart? Yeah, I've always asked that too, but there are people. I think that also comes more from an academic thing. It's sort of like,
Oh
who
yeah,
is not like,
I'm too advanced to like Mozart. Yes.
yeah, it's too,
Mhm.
that's the sort of Glenn Gould thing. He was,
Yeah.
let's not get into
Yeah. Let's not get into Glenn Gould.
that. That's a whole different stream. I'm not going to do. Somebody else can do. So I think, what do you think? Are there any solutions in academia to this sort of pervasiveness? What can be
Mm.
done? How can the ideology be changed? Because I think the ideology is pretty still not
You know,
that, or the just alternatives have to start existing outside of the sort of established academic realm where people
you know,
just ignore.
the Yale graduate composition program does one thing that I think is very admirable, which is like, we're not going to give you the degree unless you go out for a year and come back with some actual accomplishment in terms of like with your music. And it's not just, I don't think it's just academic accomplishment. It's not like a paper or whatever. It's
Mhm.
like actually make a name for yourself, you know
Okay.
and so they actually have this thing. I heard it from one of them. I don't know the details, but something like that, that's actually a good idea. So you can't just write music. You actually have to bring your music out there and come back with some good result, meaning some people that actually are engaged in your work. I
Mhm.
think something like that can happen. Also, one thing that happens is that you have all of these graduate programs with of composition, and all of these, the people that come out of it compete for academic jobs instead of again, like finding ways of marketing music. And I'm guilty of this, of course. That's what I did. But I am trying to do things on. I put things on YouTube, and a lot of people frown on YouTube from like an academic world. If I can get people to listen to what I do, and I'm happy. I mean, that's my biggest reward. Is to having people say, I like this piece, and it can be like a random comment. I'm that makes me happy more than a pat in the back from a professor. Like I never really, you know, try to write music for my professors, and they can confirm that. I always kind of like went my way, and trying to be truth to myself. Also, I had good professors. So like one of them told me, you should write music that you like, and that's the best advice. Like you shouldn't write for but you shouldn't
That
be
you like or that you'd want to hear yourself, that sort
right.
of thing. Yeah.
You shouldn't be easy on. That doesn't mean that you should be easy on yourself.
Hmm.
Like say, "Oh, this is so cool. I'm not gonna." No, like usually you do need to be a little obsessive about what you're writing in terms of like this could be better, or this, like if you hear the day after and it sounds like crap, or like you have to be very self-critical, but at the same time not be thinking, oh, what will that guy think about my music? What would Fernihau think about my music? You
Hmm.
shouldn't care. Like that's like you have to be truth to your own passion. And if you're writing music, probably you do have that passion. So yeah.
Yeah. I also think there does need to be sort of some embrace of things that appeal to the average person. Like there was never any serious adoption of, let's say, like jazz or any pop characteristics in sort of serious music realm. Whether you think that's a good idea or not is another topic, but um, there was never like nobody tried really to write like I've said this before in another video, like an electric guitar concerto or something, like, you know what I mean, just something that might appeal to a broader audience, and be something more of the zeitgeist than Adorno, which most people who aren't into philosophy or politics or music don't know who he is.
Right. Now there are people writing guitar concertos. I heard actually more than one.
Electric guitar
Yeah.
concertos.
Yeah, I heard one
Oh,
was
please,
really good by
you got to
a
send
guy
me.
a guy who's
But I
teaching.
mean, like in the '60s, like at the height of like when the first
Yeah.
came out, or like when like there's a couple of other things that like, or like putting. I think maybe Hans Zimmer does this now, like electric basses in the orchestra, just trying stuff like
Yeah.
that, but still writing tonal music, or borrowing like certain stuff from like rock music or pop or whatever. I do think a little bit of that is all right, but then again, that goes against the whole, as we discussed before, Adorno.
Yeah, I mean,
Concept.
I think the épate la bourgeoisie kind of aspect of things is dying out. I think
Mhm,
nobody takes that seriously. Like pieces where you destroy your instrument, they have been done so many times. Like
mhm.
I don't care. Like if you destroy your instrument,
Like the
um,
one thing in contemporary dance, it's always been taking your clothes off. If you take your clothes off in front of the
right?
audience, but they've been doing that since the 1920s. Nobody cares anymore.
Yeah.
At
Even though I
least
have to say that contemporary dance has kind of succeeded in doing modern stuff in a way that is sometimes convincing. I sometimes appreciate that, but you
sometimes
find out,
I've seen some pretty weird stuff
yeah,
in contemporary.
yeah. But you can tell when usually the companies that do good work, they actually these dancers are all very good classically trained.
Oh no, that's true. They
Yeah,
are. Yeah.
yeah,
No, but I'm just saying that the shock factor used to be that, but now it doesn't mean anything. I was
yeah.
just saying
So
it doesn't mean anything anymore.
I think that's gone. Thank God. Except for the piece that we were talking about before we went on air, like the cars and the the cars with the.
Yeah,
So
let me
that's
see.
still kind of gimmicky, like
This
a
is a
concept.
new piece.
I think now it's not as new anymore. But he want like see that. So I had a graduate student came to me and say, I want to write like this guy, and he showed me this piece for a car and orchestra, where people would just open and close doors and the orchestra
Yeah, this.
doesn't do anything. Yes, that thing. And I told them, I cannot help you with this. This is a gimmick. I actually told him this is a gimmick. And he was like, what do you mean? Like this was commissioned by the Biennale of Venice. And so
Mhm,
you see how this works, because since this guy was commissioned by the Biennale, then it means that his piece is good for contemporary music standard. So it's kind of
mhm.
like inverting the thing. It's not like that. It shouldn't work like that. So it's the institution that chooses a piece like this that to set a new standard, instead of having the standard coming out organically from the you know the artist or the
It just
culture.
seems so alien to everything that came before. But I think that's the idea.
Yeah.
I
So
really don't. There's a point where I don't see it as a continuation anymore. I see it almost this is like its own thing.
and in that they are successful because they want
Yeah.
they want to be seen that way. They definitely want to be seen that way. So there is also, this is the postmodern, to go back to that postmodern mindset, is not only to do something artistic, but also to reflect on your own profile. And there is actually a very interesting YouTube channel. It's called Carefree Wanderings, and it's this philosophy professor, German philosophy professor in Singapore, who talks a lot about this. How artists now, and he talks about many things, but he has a few videos about this. They actually work on their, what he calls, profilicity, on their profile. So what they are enhancing is not art, but it's their own profile, right?
Okay.
So if you write a piece for car and orchestra, which is a new thing, the piece is crap. I mean, nobody wants to listen to this, but we know that this guy we are showing now, so we're actually playing his own game,
Mhm.
is his own profile has been enhanced by the fact that, look, have you heard this is a guy that wrote a piece for car and orchestra?
Yeah. It's
You know,
yeah, yeah.
and that's mission accomplished. That's
Mhm.
right there, because his profile has been enhanced, it's been promoted. And so that's in the age of social media, there is this further problem where, like, the art, it becomes really like a background noise to everything else.
Yeah.
It's a little depressing, but it is what it is. And these people are the smart ones. So I'm the idiot that's trying to write something that is good in itself, and I don't. And
Yeah.
these people
But
are
you have to
smart.
ask yourself in 10 years, will anybody care about this or know this? I think this is like the this is going to be short-lived for this person. This is going to be their moment, and
But see,
that's it.
like I didn't even know about this person, and graduate students came to me saying, "I want to write like this," which to me, it's like I was depressed for a week. I'm like,
That's really sad.
yeah. And these are not even stupid people. Like, these are just, actually they're smarter, I think, in that sense than me, because they understand where the wind blows and they want
Hmm.
to go there. Like, these are people that are getting commissions from the Biennale of Venice, which is a very prestigious. I want to emphasize that it's very prestigious. Like, if you get a commission from the Biennale of Venice, you are up there with the top
Hmm.
composers of the moment,
Right, right, right.
right? And so, how do I get there? Well, you look who got it, and you do the same, or you do something, some variations of that. And for me, like, I have to say, my own, like, if I was a different person, I would say, oh, maybe this is cool. Maybe this is actually cool. I'm not understanding it. And I think there is a lot of that self-convincing psyop sort of idea where you actually start believing that's good. You actually start believing, if it got
Yeah.
that position, it means that it's good, and I'm not understanding it. But I old enough to say, no, that's just a gimmick. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
and I don't care if this guy's famous. I don't care if he got the Biennale. It's just a stupid gimmick. And
Right.
also I heard it because at that point I was like, let me hear it. Maybe it's great.
Yeah.
It's as bad as you might think it is. It's
Yeah.
absolute nonsense.
Yeah. Nonsense music is what I often call
Yeah.
much of the like sort of. But we were also talking about this yesterday, that there's this sort of like opinion, like, well, I'm sort of more traditional in the way I compose, but also looking for new avenues to write things, new avenues and new ways of taking old things and sort of repackaging them in a newer way. Um, but I was also sort of discussing, like, I also, in some respects, because I've spent so much time learning like older techniques, I do feel like a lot of these composers, if I had to like which doesn't exist anymore, like have a composer off, I do feel confident enough in my abilities to produce something I think would appeal to more people. Obviously, it's not going to be, if we're talking about this in a vacuum sort of experimental situation. Um, but what I do respect is that I do think we go like two generations back, and I don't think I could against people like Adorno or Boulez or Stockhausen. You should be rightfully intimidated by those people. Um, and I think that's the problem now, is people, it's just sort of what we were discussing yesterday. The copy of the copy of the copy
Yeah.
has no value anymore.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And this sort of veneration of doing something new and individual at the end of the day is just sort of all the same.
Yeah, I mean the technique does decay over generations. You get peaks. It's like it's a function that's never steady. It always goes up and down. Like if you look at sculpture, like nobody could sculpt anything even remotely close to what Michelangelo or Bernini. The technique is dead. It's completely dead.
Or
It
I mean,
is
there were like Greek sculptors that were
right.
on that level, and then you had 1,000 years until that came again.
Exactly, Romans
Yeah.
cannot do a copy of that, and not even that good, like
Yeah, the
it.
Romans weren't as good as the Greeks, and
Oh
with
no,
what,
not
yeah,
even
yeah, yeah,
close. The Romans
yeah,
were not artists. So
yeah.
and so like the technique that kind of peaks, like you have this moment in music history where I don't think people can really take in all of the greatness that was produced at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th, and then
Mhm,
slowly fading out with some few exceptions. But
mhm,
you have so many great composers in that era, and then that technique kind of slowly but surely it's not there anymore. And the 20th
mhm,
century also, with the two wars, pretty much breaks this pattern of people being trained. I mean, I can write a fugue, not a great one. I can still do it. I try to teach that to my students somewhat, but they don't even see the point. And probably so, like, and my the
Well, it's
people
like
that
if
taught
you read
me.
about the Paris Conservatory, they like 100 years ago, their final exam would be they'd all sit in a room, they'd get a subject, and they'd all have to write a complete fugue
That's
without
that's
an instrument in front of them. I don't think any at the composers, the best schools in the world, could do that now.
No, no, yeah, that's a final exam also in the Italian Conservatory for the
Yeah.
composition, is to write a
Mm,
fugue. And you have, yes, they close you in, they give you food, but you're locked in, and you
mm,
have to write the fugue. I don't know if it's still like that, but it's a craft, and it's not easy to do. Like you have to, like in Italy, like before you start doing counterpoint, you do 4 years of harmony. Like you don't
mhm.
even get to counterpoint after, like you have to do that first. And so that kind of technique is, people just say, why should I do that? I'm not going to write a Baroque style,
I
but
will say why you should do it now, if I can, if
yeah,
I
please,
can say
please,
why.
because I want to try to
You should,
communicate.
yeah, you should do this because it's only an enhancement, and it's like the foundation to your church, your cathedral. You want to build a great idea, and if you don't have these fundamental techniques, forget it. It's like trying to build the Colosseum without knowing how to build an arch. You can't.
Yeah,
You can't. You can't be a great composer. Even Schoenberg could do it, Webern could do it, and their
Absolutely.
12-tone music is, and Babbitt could do it. I mean, Babbitt wrote a bunch of very, um, very pensive, nice choral pieces that are completely tonal. You can go there and see that he was a competent composer, a competent craftsman. I can disagree with his opinions later and the way he composed, but he knew what he was doing. So if you want to, if you want your even your most avant-garde pieces to have substance to them, if you don't learn anything, you're just going to write crap. You're just going to write meaningless nonsense. But if you have something that's connected to the long tradition of what it means to write music in the Western canon, then you need to underpin it with that. You just need to. Otherwise, it's why are you doing it? Do pop music or something.
Yeah,
There's
and
no
even if
point.
you want to write pop music, even there
It
it's
can't harm. Yeah,
yeah, it can hurt. Yeah,
yeah.
sure.
So
So yeah,
I think I think you wanted to talk about Clementi, who's another Darmstadt composer, but I think if you'd be willing to, maybe we could do that in a couple months on another stream if you'd be interested.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
That'd be
We can
cool.
talk about that, and you can explain sort of why you consider him sort of a different class than like your
Yeah, I
Stockhausen.
think he's an interesting character, and they kind of changed the way that I think. Like he had this, like with this as a preview, he has this idea that for him, like music, and it's related to what we were talking about. Music is dead. He actually was as radical as that. And the
Okay.
composer could only narrate the end of music, could only narrate the end of music. So, and the beginning, I was like, this guy is insane. But then the more you read and the more you get in tune with this, because why would you write music if music is dead? But at the end, like I'm kind of sold on his point of view, and
Okay.
I can talk about why. Like I remember at the beginning, I was like, no, I'm not. I like these pieces, but I don't like what he says. Now I'm kind of like I understand why he says that, and I think he has a point. Even though there is a bright side, there is a flip side of that negativity. I think it's important.
So we can make an extra clickbaity thumbnail. Music is dead.
The end of music. Yeah.
Yeah, the end of music.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's sort of like the Fukuyama, the end of history.
Right.
Yeah.
But more true. More true.
But more true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was. Do you have anything you want to promote? Your channel is the same as your name there on screen.
Yeah,
So
my
people
channel
will.
is kind of like, so the videos that we've been talking about is just a small component. I also do technical stuff, and I'm assuming that most people following this channel will not be interested in the technical stuff. But my channel is a little more kind of scattershot all over the place. It's not as
Doesn't
yeah,
matter. It's good to promote yourself as a composer. God knows we need it.
yeah, yeah.
So, and I think most people know me, and I give lessons and stuff. You can check my other videos in the description. And it was a pleasure having you on. And I hope to we next time we can talk about Clementi. We'll talk about when. And
Okay.
thanks for
Well,
thanks for stopping in with us. And
thank
bye
you very much.
everybody.